In other words, Wallenberg was an agent of the American government. All of the funds, all of the plans, everything he did was planned by the American government. And all the money, by the way. He spent a lot of money bribing millions of dollars Nazi officials. So whatever Wallenberg accomplished, and he was a very brave man, he disappeared at the end of the war, and I'll get to that in a minute, was actually the work of the Roosevelt administration and the American people. So the Roosevelt critics spin it. All I want them to do is tell the whole story. Where did Raoul Wallenberg come from? He was picked by people from the Joint Distribution Committee and the State Department. He worked for the American government. So yes, he's a hero, and he's a hero because we sent him there. Wallenberg, ironically, was captured by the Russians in the closing days of the war because they thought he was an American spy, because he was working for the American government. And they, you know, the Cold War began just as World War II was ending. And so they whisked him off to some prison, and he was never heard from again. Well, finally, I want to get to this Auschwitz business because the bombing of Auschwitz and the St. Louis are the two big stories, and everybody gets very upset about this. There's no, first of all, let me say this. There's no question that American bombers could have bombed Auschwitz between May and November of 1944. In fact, American bombers had bombed Auschwitz because Auschwitz was an industrial military complex as well as a death camp. They manufactured synthetic fuel and munitions and everything else, and they used the slave labor at the death camps to build bombs. So the American Air Force had already targeted it and had bombed the facilities. But here's the point, and I think it's one of the more original points in my book. Nobody wanted to bomb Auschwitz. You see, we were in Italy, and if you look at the boot of Italy, there's Foggia, and we had an air base, and you could fly bombers, and we did fly bombers from that air base to Poland to bomb. So the argument that we couldn't do it, I don't agree with. We could have done it. In fact, we did do it. The fallacy in the argument is nobody was in favor of it. In other words, the Wyman School and all their followers have got everybody convinced that Jewish leaders were beating down the door of the White House to beg the president to bomb the camps. Well, it just isn't true. I mean, it just is not true. In fact, the overwhelming majority of the Jewish leadership worldwide opposed the bombing of Auschwitz, including David Ben-Gurion, who later the first premier of Israel, prime minister of Israel, the Jewish Agency Executive, which was the Jewish agency that ran Palestine before the creation of Israel, and the World Jewish Congress, which was the biggest Jewish organization in America, adamantly and in writing opposed the bombing of Auschwitz. We do not know the truth concerning the entire situation in Poland, Ben-Gurion said, and it seems we will be unable to propose anything concerning this matter. The board of the JAE, the Joint Agency for Palestine, voted 11-1 against asking the Allies to bomb Auschwitz. They never did ask the Allies to bomb Auschwitz. Why? As one member said, and these are in the minutes, it is forbidden for us to take responsibility for a bombing that could very well cause the death of even one Jew. And there are teachings in Judaism that it's a sin to take an innocent life. And what you find is, you know, and here are the letters from Kubowitzki, who's the head of the World Jewish Congress Committee to Save the Jews of Europe. This is a massive organization, mainstream, all branches of Judaism. And Kubowitzki, who himself was a refugee from Nazi Europe, was the head of the rescue department. He wrote the War Refugee Board, the destruction of the death installations. I don't know if you can read it or not, but it's there for you to read. Cannot be done by bombing from the air, as the first victims would be the Jews who are gathered in these camps. And such a bombing would be a welcome pretext for the Germans to assert that their Jewish victims had been massacred, not by their killers, but by Allied bombing. So despite erroneous assertions by many historians, including the Holocaust Museum, Jewish leaders overwhelmingly opposed the bombing of Auschwitz. Kubowitzki wrote, and this is the actual correspondence. I'm not asking you to study it in a brief speech, but here he's saying this in July 1, and here he's saying this on August 2nd. I think you know that we're not in favor of the bombing of the installations because we believe in Chayei Shah, which is Hebrew, literally life of the hour, meaning we're concerned about the people who are still alive, and we don't want anything to happen to him. We're afraid for the victims of such bombing. Now, what the Holocaust Museum does, and I've written to them and said, I'd be happy to redo your exhibition anytime you want to straighten this mess out. Haven't heard back from them. Still waiting. This is the letter at the Holocaust Museum, and I'm sure some of you have been there, and it's a wonderful museum, and the people who run it are wonderful, and everything they do is great. But on this issue, they're just wrong. They took this letter and they blew it up and made it 10, 20 feet high, and this letter is a letter to John Mccloy. Now, Mccloy was Assistant Secretary of War, and he's a very convenient target because he's kind of a WASP, mildly anti-Semitic guy who belongs to some clubs in New York that Jews don't belong to, and so he's a kind of a good guy to make into a villain. After he gets the letter from Kubowitzki, after he knows that the Jewish community does not want to bomb Auschwitz, he gets this letter. And this letter, this is the letter that's posted there, that millions of people have read. My dear Mr. Secretary, I beg to submit to you, to your consideration, the following excerpts from a message we received under date of July, whatever, from Mr. Ernst Fischer of the Czechoslovak Council. Now, this is somebody in Europe. There were Jews in Europe who were asking the administration to bomb the railway lines and to bomb the camps. But nobody in America was willing to take that responsibility. I believe that destruction of the gas chambers or crematoria by bombing would have a good effect just now. The Germans are burning corpses. This should prevent the destruction of the crematoria, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is a letter to Mccloy from Kubowitzki, passing on a message from somebody else when Mccloy already knows that Kubowitzki's organization doesn't agree with it. And in case he missed the point, Kubowitzki writes later, August 30th, saying, we don't want to bomb the camps. I mean, the Jewish community could not have made it more clear to the administration that they didn't want to bomb the camps. And that's just a fact of history. Yet, when you read this school of historians, they go on and on about the demand of the Jewish community to bomb the camps. Not true at all. In fact, representatives of every major Jewish organization met with the director of the War Refugee Board on August 16, 1944, and the minutes of that meeting, which I'm not going to bore you with right now, basically say the consensus was they did not want to bomb the camps. So the history is the exact opposite of this fantasy world in which America is culpable for not bombing Auschwitz. And this has gotten people to the point of, of irrationality. They're so angry about it. And yet, the people who had to take responsibility for it at that time thought that it was not the right thing to do. The Russian army could have liberated Auschwitz a week later. And what is the point in killing people who might survive? I mean, the whole idea is crazy, but not in the world of the Roosevelt critics. Now, what can we finally say about Roosevelt and the Holocaust? First, he had the support of 90% of American Jews in his races for the presidency. Say what you want to about the Jewish people. They're not stupid. They knew Roosevelt was the one man in the world who could stop Adolf Hitler, and they appreciated it. The Jews have 3 Welten, Yiddish. My Yiddish is not great, but it's not bad. It means worlds in Yiddish. Congressman Jonah Goldstein said, Die Welt, this world, Jene Welt, the next world, and Roosevelt. Okay. One guy in Brooklyn, his friend asked him, who are you voting for in the 1940 election? He said, I'm voting for Mendel Wilke. He says his name's not Mendel Wilkie, his name is Wendell Wilkie. Well, in that case, I'm voting for Rosenfeld.